Let's talk about the music industry. Where is it?
Well,
where was it?
Yeah, where was it? Where is it? Well, I mentioned earlier about warning signs that I was mentioning back around 1999 or 2000, because at that time I was talking with the record labels like Polygram and Pony Canyon, SPV, Spitfire, and of course that was about the time Napster and MP3 files were first coming out.
Right.
And I said, "Uh-oh, this is going to present a problem." And they said, "Why? It's just another format." I said, "No, this format's different." I said, "This one's going to, the technology will allow for widespread theft."
Wow.
They go, "Oh, we've dealt with theft forever. I mean, everybody makes cassette copies of a song and shares with their friends." I said, "No, technologically, here's the difference. By the time you make a cassette copy of a record, and then make a cassette copy of a cassette copy of a cassette copy, the sound quality is so bad, no one wants to listen to it. So you have and you also have limited distribution. You can only physically distribute it to your small circle of friends. So even though the theft has always existed, it's so small, it's insignificant to the total industry."
Right.
But now we have a technology where, in theory, and I used this exact analogy back then, I said, I'm not saying this would happen, but theoretically it could. People could get on the internet and say, "Hey, do not buy the new Metallica record. I'm going to buy it. And I'm going to zip the file, rip the files, and upload the MP3 to my site. And you'll be able to download it, next week." In theory, I'm not saying here again, in actual practice, it wouldn't be quite this bad, but in theory, it can happen. So that one guy buys the new Metallica album, puts the MP3s on his site, and 30 million people just download it. So at the end of the day, Metallica got paid for one album.
Exactly.
Now that's the extreme example, but technologically and theoretically, that is the potential for how bad it could be. Now I said this back in 20 years ago. And again, the record labels at the time, now here again, with working with Ingve, I was not the biggest record labels, but record labels nonetheless. They didn't see it. They said, well, that's never going to be a widespread problem. But they just didn't understand computer technology well enough to grasp it. They said, well, I'm sure the government will do something to regulate it, or I'm sure they'll find a way to encrypt the files so that you can't make a copy of it. I'm sure they'll do that. And I said, well, if you understand how MP3 encoding and stuff works, you can't do that.
Wow.
And they said, well, our feeling is it's going to offer a lot of free publicity. So enough people will still go out and buy the record or whatever to make up for what we lose, because now anybody and everybody can hear it. And I said, there's an old adage in business. If everybody's doing the same thing, as though nobody's doing it at all. Because you're not doing anything unique. And this probably is jumping a little bit ahead, but it has to do with the internet and young artists today. You'll hear young artists who for a couple of years were arguing, I think the technology is great, because now we don't have to wait for a record label to make us famous. We can make ourselves famous. And that's true to an extent. But here again, that brings up the saying that I just said. If everybody back then it was MySpace. When MySpace first came out, the bands who were first on MySpace were very successful. Then every band in the world thought, we need a MySpace page. Then once they did that, MySpace no longer helped any artist. Because once everybody's doing it, it's as though nobody is. To use another analogy, if you're alone in the ocean screaming for help, there's a good chance a rescue plane will find you.
Okay.
But if there are 35 million people bobbing up and down in the water screaming, help me, help me, help me, and we're out there in a plane looking for Chris Gordon, we may have a hard time finding him.
Right.
Amongst all the static and the noise.
Because of the noise. Right.
Yeah.
Good point.
And,
right.
So, we fast forward 20 years and the industry's kind of done a flop. Back then, the mindset seemed to be, we tour only for the purpose of promoting the sales of our album.
Right.
Touring was viewed as a marketing device to sell the product.
Correct.
Now, the product has no value. The product has almost no income, and touring has become the thing you must do to put money in your bank account.
Right.
You flip the entire industry around backwards, and the album is just nothing but, it's the thing that you're going to do on the tour that pays the money, but it's not the prime product anymore.
Right. It's kind of the reversal now, right? You toured to promote the album.
Yeah.
Now you do an album to promote a tour.
Yeah.
Right.
Basically. Yeah.
Or at least you record something so you have a little bit more merch at the table.
Yeah.
Besides a T-shirt and a coffee cup.
Yeah.
Or a beer stein, whatever your thing is, or a hat. But you get, yeah, exactly. So I know, I agree. I think that's exactly what happened. Is that, and that's interesting to me to hear that because you were there, you were talking to these labels, and you were like, guys, you might want to pay attention. And no, they were thinking, no, the government's going to take care of it. No, they're not. Not going to happen.
Well, if you look today, that mistake has been repeated in another format. I'd like to be a fly on the wall and hear how these record labels negotiated the current streaming payouts, where you've got these Spotify's or whatever that, you have artists who, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head here, but are saying, hey, we had 3,000 plays of our song, and here's our check for $128.
Here's our check. Yeah.
I would love to, I'm trying to see what kind of idiots negotiated those kind of.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other thing, and I think that's a separate show that I want you on the panel for, because that's an interesting thing, because I did some research on that, and that's a rabbit hole, but I did some research on it, and to where those numbers started to pan out, and I'm like, wow, this is crazy. And there's arguments on both sides that are intense. And I want to have you on that panel because I have people on both sides that are actually like, yo, no, it's completely 100% cool. And other people who are like, what are you smoking? You know what I mean? And so I think that's that you're absolutely right. Like, because that is where we are. That's where we've ended up in the industry. And now more so than ever, because we don't have, right now, the live industry is done, for the time being. We'll see. But, so now we're going to be looking to that. And I want to get to that. I think that's going to be, I think that's going to be a show unto itself, But what I'd like to do is, I want to round our interview out with where you are now and what you're doing. What's your current projects? What's your vibe?
Well, right now I have to confess I'm kind of semi-retired. So I do occasionally have companies that contact me to help them with their operations. I mean, for example, all of 2019. There was a company, it's been around for 45 years, and the owner of that company, it's actually a company that I had helped save from a bad merger and acquisition back in 2005. The company had gone through, two companies merged, and the merger didn't go well. And even though both companies were healthy when they merged, this company was seriously in risk of going out of business after the merger.
Okay.
And two owners of the company agreed to hire me to come in for 2 years to run it. And it was successful. As a matter of fact, by the time I left, that particular company was the largest in its business sector in its region. So we were able to turn that around. Well, that particular company, the primary president, who'd been there since day one for 45 years, he finally wanted to take some time off. And that's understandable. I mean, you've had the same company for 45 years and you're the president, you've really never taken an extended break. So he asked me if I would come in for 2019 and run the company in his absence.
Nice.
So all of 2019, I was serving as the president and chief operating officer of that company, to give him a year break. And of course, at the beginning of the year, he came back and, refreshed and whatever. So that was the last big assignment I've done. Other than that, like I said, I'm approaching 60. I'm semi-retired, but I do have occasional consulting jobs like that come up, usually shorter term, where people say, "Hey, we have this problem. Can you come in?" Somebody jokingly one time said, "You're like the hired gun of Clint Eastwood. You come into a town, clean it up, get rid of the bank robbers, then ride off into the sunset," sort of thing. So.
But I can still hear you go, improvise, adapt.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like something that you do. You improvise and adapt. Anything musically going on with you?
Well, like I said, for me, music has always been, except for the years working with Ingve professionally, for me, it's mostly been a hobby.
Okay.
I will, as you know, because you did a guest solo in one of my songs.
Yes, I did. Very honored
I
to do
still
that.
like to occasionally write an original song and release it just as a hobby, but that's all it is for me. So maybe write and release one original song per year.
Okay.
I continue to do that, enjoy it as a hobby, and it's been a little bit more challenging lately because I had a little bout with that I'm still recovering from a what they call focal dystonia, where you tend to lose a little muscle control with certain motor movements in your hand. I'd never even heard of it before until I started talking with some other musicians. It was shapes, patterns, scales, whatever. If you've played effortlessly at high tempos for years,
Right.
suddenly you find your fingers not wanting to behave.
Yeah.
And in certain fingering combinations, and it's like, oh, what's happening to me? Am I getting old? Am I losing reflex speed? I had no clue what was going wrong. But then asking some musicians about it, I think I asked I asked Paul Gilbert about it.
We talked about it, yeah. And you talked to Paul Gilbert about this too.
Yeah, and he said, fortunately, he's never experienced anything like that, but he was aware of it because of other musicians he'd heard of it. And I'd never even heard the term before. And I researched it, and it's like there's no test they do for it. It's one of those diagnoses that the symptoms are the indication that you have it.
Right.
And they don't really know what causes it, and it's still kind of vague, but it's kind of strange to think, it's almost like your fingers will freeze in certain combinations. Like they actually said the neural pathway gets confused, that from overuse or they actually said one of the theories is the human body normally tries to find the most efficient way to do things.
Right.
And if you think about guitar playing, complex guitar playing, like shredding and fast scale runs,
right,
that's not a natural thing the body does in nature. Normally, if you're going to use your hand for something in nature, you're reaching out to grab an apple from a tree or grab a tree limb. Everything works together.
Yeah.
Making everything work independently and discreetly and very accurately is not a biologically efficient thing.
Correct.
The theory is that the human body sometimes, for unexplained reasons, starts saying, well, instead of me firing a signal to the ring finger and then to the little finger and then back to the ring finger, why don't I just send one big signal to make all of them move at one time? That way you'll have twice as much grip strength.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, that's not what I want to do. I want them to move separate and discreetly. So the therapy for that they've found, there's no definite cure, is you almost have to relearn to play and slowly play through the patterns that trigger that neural mistake, almost like retraining your neural network.
Yep.
It's kind of like forcing your brain and your fingers to find a new pathway to communicate, to overcome the old road or the old highway that's got pit holes in it or whatever.
Yeah, or potholes, right? Exactly. Yeah, and I'm fascinated by this science, and we're going to be doing a follow-up show on this entire thing called focal dystonia, because I want to, and you'll be on the show along with my friend June Abasco, another guitar player who is suffering from it. But what I find fascinating is you're suffering from it in your fretting hand, where he suffers from it in his picking hand.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be a great show to do. And I think it's going to bring a lot of awareness to this issue. And I'm fascinated because you and I, Michael, have talked on the phone about this for hours, where I started to kind of get into this mindset of, I'm fascinated with finding those neural pathways of, finding a way to, when I say find a cure, that's a little lofty. Let me just say, I'm fascinated by the process, because as a teacher and as a musician myself, I'm always fascinated by the idea of, the art of practice and the art of working through things has wider benefits other than just being able to play things, right? The other, one of the reasons that I still practice playing over giant steps every day is to keep the noggin there. It's just because there's an engagement. It's like you can't play through that tune without thinking. You have to be completely aware. And so I'm fascinated by that, and I want to dedicate a whole show to the focal dystonia thing, and have you with June on that. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Spitzer, the man who has written the book that changed my life, completely transformed my life. I can't tell you. Also, very fascinating. He really did transform many lives. He transformed a lot of Yngwie fans to knowing who Yngwie was, because he brought him back. He brought Yngwie back. And that was because of Michael. Michael, I can't thank you enough for your time today and just hanging out with you. And like I said, we've had some great phone conversations, but to be able to see you and converse with you like this is equally as cool. So thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Thank you, and I'll catch you on the next one.
And guys, come on, look at that six-pack. Look at that. Are you kidding me? God, I'm feeling very inadequate right now, but I feel great. All right, everyone. For DJB, I'm Chris Gordon. This is Unsung Heroes with Michael Spitzer. Believe me, he'll be back. We have another episode where we'll be talking about other things. And thank you for tuning in, and talk to you soon. Peace.